today's video, we are going to talking about an idea that really changed my relationships. And there are four things that will help enhance your relationships because they are a part of every happy relationship. So let's get into it because if you have ever been heartbroken, or if you've been in relationships where it's full of tension and conflict, you may start to wonder why there are some relationships that just seem to flow very easily, very naturally. And then there's other relationships that are full of tension and anxiety and heartbreak and so on. And you know if you've experienced that or if you're in one. Because, for example, you come home from a long day at work, and instead of going straight inside because you're excited to see who's in your house that you're supposed to care about, you instead have to sit in your car for 10, 20, 30 minutes just to gear up the energy because you expect a good chance of conflict or nagging or tension when you walk in the door. Or maybe you feel that way when you go to work. Maybe you feel that way not because the work is terrible, but because you are not looking forward to the people you have to work with. And so whether you are dealing with a romantic partner or a professional one, or with a boss that tends to judge you, if you feel this struggle, then you know exactly what this is about. And so without a clear framework for relationships, you will continue to experience the same cycles and attracting the same kind of people that frustrate you, or staying way too long in a relationship that should have ended a long time ago. And then as a result, miss out on the connections that you crave. And the problem with that is that when we repeat these patterns and conflict feels like it's inevitable in the relationships, you might start to wonder, it's like, well, I might be the common denominator. Am I the problem? Am I too sensitive? Am I too demanding? Um, is there something fundamentally wrong with me? That might be the question you're asking. And in a world where it's easy to have very surface level, safe conversations and relationships and connection, having something that's truly authentic feels like a luxury when in fact it's a necessity that you and I deserve. So, what is this four-part framework that's a part of every happy relationship, and how can you apply that for yourself so you don't have to repeat these toxic cycles? We're going to get into it. And so, again, my name is Rico. I'm, again, a published author of this book. And in fact, this book that I'm going to explain here is a result of over 40 experts and way more than that, who I went and researched everything they did, found what was in common between them, and wrote it into this book that's a little bit easier to understand. And as a result, this concept of PACT, P-A-C-T, has been born. So, PACT are the four elements that are in every single happy relationship. And to briefly go through them, PACT, sorry about that, the P in PACT stands for purpose. The A stands for authenticity. The C stands for communication. And the T, it stands for trust. So a pact is interesting that it spells that because a pact is exactly what happens in every kind of relationship. A pact, by definition, is an agreement that you have with somebody and it binds you to them. So in any relationship, there are agreements that you have, and it's around your purpose, and it's around being authentic. It builds trust, and that binds us together. So a brief overview and demonstrating how this works. First, purpose. Now, the reason why every happy relationship has alignment in your purpose is because when you align on what matters most, it's easier to have things flow in harmony. And without this shared purpose, or at the very least, without a shared respect for each other's purpose, Relationships tend to drift apart. All right. And so that flows into the next one, which is authenticity. And authenticity, every time I talk about it, I laugh a little bit because if you've been on social media or any media like I've been, authenticity seems to be a buzzword lately. And obviously, authenticity is showing up as our genuine selves. Now, one thing that I really appreciate about in this book that was written about in authenticity is if you consider yourself a people pleaser, because when we are a people pleaser, the tendency is to downplay what really matters to us or what's really important to us in sacrifice of pleasing other people. That people pleasing is a mask to your authentic self. It's hiding who you really are. And that mask can kill connection faster than most direct conflict would. And so we need to be authentic, and this is very, very important, especially if you are a people pleaser. Now, the third one, communication, I think very few people would argue that if you elevate your communication, you would also elevate your relationships. I don't think anybody's going to argue against that. So when we are able to master the art of being seen, heard, and validated, and helping other people feel the same, it prevents misunderstanding and it builds trust. And in this book, it really dives into communication using the three C's, that if you just nail these three C's of communication, you are going to elevate your relationships. And then finally, there's the trust factor, because obviously trust is important, but it's like, how do you build trust? It definitely is something that can be built over time, but one thing that's not brought up enough is having healthy boundaries and how to set up those healthy boundaries. Sometimes when we want to put up these boundaries, we are afraid, and this is where, especially if you're a people pleaser, we might be afraid to put up these boundaries because we are afraid that we will be liked less, not more. The reality is that these boundaries create the container for us to show up as our authentic self. It creates the container where it's a safe space for us to be vulnerable with our deepest thoughts and our emotions and so forth. And so when you learn how to create these healthy boundaries, it helps to facilitate the trust that is necessary in relationships and impact. And so these are the four things that are necessary. Now, the beauty of this framework of PACT is that if you were to go onto the internet and look up relationship advice, you're not going to find a shortage of relationship advice, right? Matter of fact, the problem that I have with relationship advice on the internet is that not only can some of it vary wildly, also it just feels like it's just a bunch of bullet points that go forever. And then you're looking at all this like, oh my gosh, like, how do I make sense of all this? The other option is to go off of the blueprint that you were given in your life. And unfortunately, for a lot of us, the blueprint that we've been given isn't stellar. So maybe we grew up in a home where we were abused or neglected, or mom and dad didn't set the best example of how relationships should work. Maybe you grew up like me in a single parent home. And in that instance, in a lot of cases, one parent doesn't necessarily talk glowingly about the other. And that talk can shape your mind about how relationships work or how dangerous they are. And so if we have to choose between the blueprint we were given growing up or this long list of bullet points on relationship advice that's hard to understand and make sense of, it's no wonder why a lot of people feel that they struggle in relationships and that there's always tension, and they wonder, like, is there something wrong with me? What I love about the research that I've done that is now in this book is that what I've discovered is that people aren't bad, you're not bad, I'm not bad. That's not the reason why relationships don't work. The reality is that the reason why relationships seem to struggle is because of the absence of a clear framework for building and maintaining those relationships. And so while society, again, gives us a lot of relationship advice, or Hollywood fantasies, or your own upbringing gives you a blueprint, none of these really create the lasting effect that we wish we had. And that was the case for me. You're talking to a guy that, like, this is the book that I wish that I had before two failed marriages. This is the book that I had that I wish that was the mentor to help me. Now, what's also interesting is that when I look back on life, the best relationships that I had followed this principle. And to just be able to put it in a much more simple, easy to understand way has been helpful for me and helped me to realize that the good parts of relationships are definitely possible, and attracting the best relationships of your life are definitely possible. You just have to know this framework and then elevate your communication, that C part, and your relationships are going to really take off. At least that's what's happened for me. And as a coach, when I see it happen to other people, it just brings a lot of joy, a lot of joy to see other people happy in their relationships. So, what's also cool about this is that if you're like, well, how do I know if it's going to work for me? You don't have to just take my word for it. If you were to get the book, and I'm going to give you the link to it below if you would like to check it out, page 22 talks about a story of Sam and Alex. They met at a charter school, and they, again, not knowing each other, they were strangers. When they met, they were able to apply this principle, and not only did their relationship flourish, but a lot of their goals and the thing, they did great things at the school and at the community that they lived in. There's another person in here. Her name is Kara. She accidentally realized or stumbled upon what makes relationships work. And her story is in here on page 19, very first chapter, to show how this principle helps not just my life, but others too. And so if that is of interest of you, because you could imagine yourself, or maybe you really do desire being surrounded by relationships that energize you. So when you finish your workday, you're not like having to sit in your car like, oh, I can't, I'm gonna have to go home and deal with what's ever there. But instead, you're like, I can't wait to come home and share my life with the person that cares about me and I care about them. Or maybe it'll be that way when you go to work. How you communicate elevates the relationships that you have there. And instead of being like, oh my gosh, I don't want to go to work, you're like, I can't wait to go and see the people I'm working with today. If you can imagine that scenario of relationships that energize you instead of emotionally draining you, you can picture yourself elevating your communication skills. So when conflict inevitably does happen, you can be very confident that you're going to walk out of that conversation better and not worse. When you imagine your relationships being the reason why you are growing and not a reason why you're being held back. If that is of interest to you, I highly recommend getting this book, or going to the Attract and Impact website. There's actually a free assessment on there where you can find out, where are you the strongest in your relationships? Where could you use a little bit more work? And that might be the starting point for you. Until then, you can expect more and more free content on this channel to help you improve the relationships. Because again, if you elevate how you communicate, you elevate the relationships, and everything in life becomes a little bit better. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'll talk to you next time.